Look at what happened the last time she was on that side of the world. No, I ran into her at 211, and she was like super excited to be back there. She was actually talking about her week and like when she was going to get in and adjust and how she did it last time and whatnot. But I think for the Singapore card, it was our first time back in Asia in basically 18 months. We have a good relationship with the government there. There's a number of people in that region behind it. It's kind of our hub from a UFC perspective with our office, but it's also IMG's hub as well outside of Shanghai for Asia, and they have a ton of people there. So we're like, we have to bring, this has to be some star power on this card, even if it's not necessarily like the natural hook. I mean, Singapore itself doesn't have a ton of talent. So you're going to get a mix, so you got the Hall, you got the former champion, you got Holly, you got Betch, you got Dos Anjos, another former champion, but then you have Stun Gun, so you have that Asian element, and then I think the undercard, we have a mix of Japanese and everything. So it's kind of like a pan-regional card, and that's what we were trying to do, because Singapore is kind of a hub. It's actually, I think it's only 6 or 7 million people actually within Singapore. It's like fairly small, but the hope was that this would kind of be a beacon for Southeast Asia for an event, and you'd actually, because we're not going, I'm telling you, we're not going to Malaysia anytime soon with an event. Thailand's probably still a fair ways off. Jakarta, it probably doesn't make sense. So the hope was like, hey, this Singapore event is actually a regional event for Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and the rest of the region. Yeah, it goes back to the whole calendar thing. It's just not always easy, having it make sense. So I think, last year in particular, we had the Philippines moved, and with the injury and whatever, we moved it. But, a good example is we wanted to go back to Seoul as well last year. But now that arena's under renovation. So the hope is that we're back in Seoul probably first or second quarter of 18 when it comes back online. And then Japan, Tokyo, Saitama is actually one of the most busy arenas in the world as well. And we had the date held that matched up with our TV date, and then we found out that actually no, it was the weekend after, which we couldn't do because it was like a pay-per-view weekend or something like that. So sometimes it's just like you just can't win. So I think on the surface it probably looked like, oh, UFC is pulling back out of Asia, and it really was just one of those situations where like the stars didn't align from us from a calendar, from a venue, whatever. So, we were never really pulling out, but I think this is, at least this year will look like a recommitment to the region. So we'll be in Singapore, Japan, and then we have the event in November that is TBD, and then we'll hopefully be back first half of next year in Seoul, and maybe back to Philippines again, and probably do 2 or 3 events again in 2018. So it's definitely a focus for IMG and everything they have going on in the region on the entertainment side. Obviously, like in China specifically, that box office will arguably pass the US box office in the near future. So they have big business there and aspirations. And we do too as well. I think the challenge for us in China historically was there was really no path to monetization. It's like, okay, great, like everyone needs to be in China, there's 1.3 billion people. But it was kind of like, okay, like we've been here for a few years, we're not really making any money, like what's the end goal? And that was a function of like the media market there was very much just kind of free to air, provincial broadcasters that didn't necessarily pay for sports content. But then you had the emergence of the digital players that actually started buying TV rights, the PPTVs, the LIT TVs of the world. We ended up securing a pretty attractive and lucrative deal with PPTV. And then it was kind of like, okay, the light bulb went off. Okay, maybe it's time to reinvest and actually build this thing out. And that's kind of where we're at now. So China is definitely a priority and a focus. And it's going to be on the talent side. It's definitely a little more challenging. I mean, obviously the language barrier in and of itself is a challenge. And I think the difference between, I guess, Asia and Western Europe is that even though Western Europe you have, different languages, whether it's German, French, English, culturally everything's pretty much the same, and the way of doing business is the same, right? So you can kind of navigate that, and there's a fair amount of English. So like it's been very easy for us to move from market to market in Western Europe. In Asia, it's not just like the language is different, it's like just culturally and the way of doing business is completely different in Korea as it is in Japan, as it is in China. So I think that was definitely a learning curve for us. But now we have the IMG resources, people on the ground with the relationships that have been there for however long, so it's definitely made things easier. But no, I mean, we've been successful in Korea. I think you find the right partners. It's like anything in business. You find the right people that you're comfortable working with, that you trust, and you can get things done. And I think in Korea we had that with our event in Seoul. Japan, the last few events, we've had pretty good relationships on the ground, and we have no concerns about going back. And I think China, that was we've had the events in Macau, but it's very easy doing business with an American casino company. We can have the conversations here. I can go down the strip to go to the Venetian and have the conversation, and we can figure it out. It's a completely different animal going to mainland China, Shanghai or Beijing for the first time, and I think now that we have the IMG China, WME IMG China staff on the ground in both Beijing and Shanghai, that's not a matter of if, it's more a matter of when, and I can tell you that it's definitely on the horizon.